and welcome. I'm Eric Gao, and here's what happened this week. Monday marked the 10-year anniversary of the Sunflower Movement, when student activists stormed Taiwan's legislature in protest over a trade deal with China. John Van Trieste looks at the event's significance.
Taiwan's legislature has a reputation for heated debate and even physical fights between members. But 10 years ago today, it saw its biggest uproar ever, led not by lawmakers, but angry students. On the evening of March 18, 2014, lawmakers gathered to ratify a controversial trade pact with China. China claims Taiwan, and the opposition said opening Taiwan's service sector would give China another tool to threaten Taiwan's democratic system. Still, the ruling Kuomintang pushed the trade deal through after a review that lasted just 30 seconds. Before long, hundreds of protesters had gathered outside the legislature, angry both at the pact itself and the way in which it was forced through. Li Junda recalls what happened next.
不知道为什么就有一个梯子，然后我们就从梯子翻过围墙，没有什么警察，然后很多人就陆陆续续就冲进去、穿进去这样子。
Thus began an occupation of the legislature that would last more than 3 weeks. Students barricaded themselves inside, repulsing efforts by the police to get them out by force. Some would later try and fail to occupy the cabinet building too. They adopted as their symbol the sunflower, a flower that always turns away from dark toward the sunlight. Though they number just a few hundred, many more soon took to the streets outside in solidarity. A March 30th rally brought out more than 100,000 protesters.
那今天政府透过这样子的手法，30秒短短的30秒内通过这么重大的议题，我们实在是没有办法接受，因为这个攸关于全民的非常大的协议，是应该要好好坐下来讨论，听听人民的声音。
我们绑在头上的就是捍卫民主，退回服贸。然后我认为最重要就是台湾是一个民主国家，那么现在重要是它的民主 已经是受到破坏，所以造成了这些学生讲的所谓的宪政危机。
Inside the legislature, protesters drew up a list of demands. Chief among them, a fresh review of the trade pact and new rules to govern future agreements with China. In the end, they won. The government agreed to draft the rules before the pact was reviewed again. The students left the legislature on April 10th, ending a standoff unlike anything else in Taiwan's history. The agreement with China remains unratified. 10 years on, there are different ways of looking at the Sunflower student movement. Supporters of the government at the time say the protests ultimately failed.
第一个，检讨黑箱，民进党执政黑箱更多啊。当时台湾的服务业很有优势，结果现在呢，中国大陆的服务业全部起来了。我们本来可以到大陆去，我们的服务业进军大陆去，赢得 更多的市场，就现在也没了。
Others, including scholars who've studied the movement, say it forced Taiwan to reconsider its ties with China, with consequences Taiwan is still feeling today.
I think Sunflower movement actually initiated a trend and a reflection that are we going to go down with one China principle in economy, or we are going to choose the alternative? And I think that legacy still stays.
It may still be too early to properly assess the Sunflower student movement. That's because the trade pact has never been formally abandoned. There have even been recent calls to revive it. After a decade, the big questions the movement raised, of how close Taiwan should get to China and of when direct action might be justified, are far from answered. James Lin and John Van Trieste for TaiwanPlus.
That Sunflower Movement sparked the creation of many small parties in Taiwan representing the interests of younger voters. But the most prominent one is now fighting to stay relevant. Tiffany Wong explains.
At a small office in New Taipei, the new Power Party is still hard at work, even as the momentum from the student protests that sparked its creation nearly a decade ago dies down.
的确，我觉得时代力量是因为太阳花运动而起来的一个政党。那这10年来，其实社会运动或是人民对于政治和未来的期待是逐渐变少的。
The NPP was known for its strong pro-independence stance and its rejection of China's claims over Taiwan, with its roots in the 2014 Sunflower protests against the Kuomintang-led legislature's review of a services trade agreement that would have increased Taiwan's economic ties with China. The NPP was also boosted by its charismatic leaders, who came to prominence during the Sunflower movement. They included Cornell-educated legal scholar Huang Guochang and rocker-turned-politician Freddie Lim. The party was also known for appealing to a new class of progressively minded young voters, looking for an alternative to Taiwan's two-party deadlock.
The New Power Party was really sort of the formalized version of the Sunflower Movement's activism and spirit that wanted to see a meaningful change in Taiwanese politics. Really wanted to see the KMT not win another presidential election, but also felt a certain sense of dissatisfaction with the DPP.
In its first legislative elections, the NPP won 5 seats, becoming the third largest party after the DPP and KMT. But in this year's elections, the NPP didn't win a single seat in the legislature, leaving lawmaking up to the two largest parties and a newer third force party, the Taiwan People's Party. Experts say the NPP's organizational structure made it difficult for members to advance the party's goals, causing some of the NPP's biggest politicians to jump ship, leaving the party struggling to stay afloat.
Support for what the NPP stood for, anti-KMT sentiment, pro-independence politics, those didn't necessarily fluctuate and wane with the party's decline. Instead, what happened with the New Power Party was a lot of the internal mechanisms that made the party run were pretty disastrous.
But those left at the NPP say they are making do with a few resources they have, and that they accomplished a Herculean task.
我想每一个人离开时代力量都有他的想法，但不可讳言的是，在台湾的政治结构里面，作为一个小党，要能够发挥理想，要能够被看见，要能够拥有资源，都是非常不容易的一件事情。
Now, with no party holding a majority in the legislature, the third force Taiwan People's Party is expected to be the determining factor in future policymaking, including cross-strait relations. And if the trade agreement with China is brought up again, it's unclear which side they will take. But the NPP says they'll be waiting in the wings, still here to stand for those looking for an alternative to Taiwan's traditional politics. Scott Huang and Tiffany Wong in New Taipei for TaiwanPlus.
On Wednesday, Taiwan's first wave of one-year conscripts took their final basic training test. Once they pass, they will be assigned to other military units. Admiral reports.
Crawling through rough terrain, providing first aid, and moving as a team under enemy fire. These are just some of the skills Taiwan's first batch of one-year conscripts must master to graduate from basic training into the rest of the military.
难的话，可能就是打靶，因为从前完全没有接受过相关的训练，但经过班长的教导以及带领之后，我最后一次练习是满靶。
The training program is part of efforts to boost the country's combat readiness, as Taiwan faces a growing threat from China, which seeks to take over the country. In response, Taiwan extended mandatory military service from 4 months to a year in 2022, and reformed parts of its training and defense strategy. This included extending basic training from 5 weeks to 8 weeks, and unit training with other parts of the military from 8 weeks to 44 weeks. Recruits also now fire 800 live rounds, up from about 200 bullets previously. And a boost to monthly pay means conscripts now earn $830, up from 200. But the military says that the biggest change, aside from the longer training period, is a focus on more realistic combat training and working more closely as a team. These recruits started training 8 weeks ago, and officials here are proud of the results and the skills these conscripts have learned.
相信各位媒体朋友也可以感受到，他们从第一天报到到今天期末测验，他们不管是身心灵，其实都有得到一个很大幅度的成长。那我这边也期许他们在下部队之后，能够有一个很好的一个发展，能够顺利退伍。
The military is on track to train over 9,000 conscripts this year, but these young men won't be on the front lines in a potential conflict. They'll play military support roles. Analysts say the extended service program is not a solution to Taiwan's low recruitment problem.
Even though the number of conscripts is going up, and so therefore that drives the overall number of people that Taiwan has in its military, they're not a replacement for regular forces. I mean, regular forces get more intensive training, they get more persistent training.
With more people in the military, analysts now say that Taiwan faces the problem of organizing different troops together. The extended conscription period is intended to help with conducting more complex training, like joint operations.
Integration between conscripted forces with the regular forces is absolutely essential. The last thing you want is to have a bunch of reservists or conscripted forces who don't know where they should be. And so the fact that they're training for a joint exercise, I think is quite helpful.
Officials in Taiwan say they value both quality and quantity in the conscript training program. The military expects many recruits here will pass the final exam with flying colors and hopes they can leave training with the skills needed to defend the country. Chris Ma and Jaime Okan in Taichung for TaiwanPlus.
A top-ranking U.S. officer says reports that U.S. Special Forces are permanently stationed on Taiwan's Kinmen Islands are false.
I was wondering if you could elaborate on the current Special Operations Force mission in Taiwan as well.
Congressman, first let me just say the article is incorrect. There is no permanent stationing of U.S. forces there. We can talk in a classified setting for further evaluation, but that is just inherently inaccurate.
On the Kinmen Island?
Correct.
Great, thank you.
Taiwanese media reported last month that there was a permanent U.S. contingent on Kinmen, which is just a few kilometers from China. Taiwan's defense minister later seemed to acknowledge that U.S. troops were stationed as trainers on the island. But Aquilino's comments have cast doubt on the nature of any posting in Kinmen. A student in northern Taiwan is in intensive care after falling from a school building in an alleged bullying incident. According to local media, this 8th grader had been bullied by older kids for some time. The fall happened during a parent-teacher event. Officials at the Taoyuan County School say that they are investigating. The case is the latest in a string of school bullying incidents reported in the country. Lawmakers are pushing for a clearer legal definition of bullying and for better measures to help the affected students. Social workers are protesting the treatment they faced ever since a child abuse scandal broke last week. As John Van Trieste reports, this case is also highlighting broader resentment over their working conditions.
These social workers, more than 100 in all, have gathered from across Taiwan to give the government a message. They are fed up. The public handcuffing of one of their colleagues in Taipei last week is what set things off. Police brought this social worker in for questioning over the death of an infant, allegedly at the hands of an abusive nanny. Officials suspect the social worker may have been negligent and falsified reports on the infant's case. But social workers and police themselves say the handcuffing and parade past news cameras were inappropriate. But the promise of a reprimand for the officer responsible hasn't calmed social workers' anger.
大家看到社工被铐的那一瞬间，为什么我们那么害怕？我们觉得恐惧，我们觉得受伤，因为很可能下一个就会是我们。
But that's just the first of many things these social workers are angry about. They have a list of demands for the government. Chief among them are greater protections from abuse and doxing, and scrapping plans to mandate more frequent checkups on children. They also want a review of pay and work capacity, a new forum to discuss child abuse, and a recognition that social workers can't support the social safety net by themselves.
安网呢，也绝对不是只有社工在支撑，但是一旦发生事情的时候，社工很有可能就会变成替罪羔羊。
The government says it will consider these demands.
工会提出蛮多诉求的，那这个部分有些可能我们私塾就可以来做讨论，有些可能还是在请教我们一些专家学者，特别是我们在社工系的一些相关的老师。
But these reviews aren't expected until late April, further testing the patience of workers who say they're overworked, underpaid, and first in the line of fire when things go wrong. Scott Huang and John Van Trieste for TaiwanPlus.
Thanks for joining us for Here's What Happened. If you want more of our stories, download our mobile app or follow us on social media. Now, before we go, check out these new Star Wars coins issued by the UK Royal Mint. These showcase the Millennium Falcon, the ship that made the Kessel Run in less than 12 parsecs. I'm Eric Gao, and may the Force be with you.
I'm Ed Moon in Taiwan's Kinmen Islands, and you're watching TaiwanPlus News, the voice of freedom in Asia.